In this week's Technique Tuesday video, I'll demonstrate how to add more room across the heel diagonal of the plain or Insta-thought heel in order to get a better fit. Each section of the video is marked down in the timeline, making it easy to skip ahead to the next section or jump back in order to review a section. This heel diagonal right here can be too tight for many people, can just not have enough room. So what I'm going to show you today is how to modify this type of heel, this plain heel or Insta-thought heel, so that you have more room in the heel and across the heel diagonal. So what I demonstrated last week was that if you were knitting cuff down, when you were finished with the leg, you would put the stitches that are not involved in the heel on waste yarn, pretty much like you would for any type of sock heel. And that would leave you with 50% of the stitches remaining to work the heel. Again, very consistent with most other types of sock heels. But the next step is, because this type of heel is worked in the round, you are working all of these stitches and then in the round toward this heel, you need to create the stitches on this half of the heel. I demonstrated that by instructing to provisionally cast on the same number of stitches that you have right here. In order to modify this type of heel for a good fit, the way that you get more room is by casting on more stitches for the provisional cast on than you have right here. By starting with more stitches, you will need to work more decreased rounds, and that will extend the length of the heel diagonal, as well as creating more depth to the heel. So in order to figure out how many stitches you need to provisionally cast on, you need to do some calculations. So I do have down in the video description, I do have a link to a Google Sheets document that will help you do these calculations, but I want to walk through what is going on. The circumference of your sock leg or your sock foot, if you are working toe up, that circumference of your sock determines what the circumference of this heel diagonal will be if you make no modifications. Whatever the circumference is of the sock leg, let's say it's an 8-inch sock leg, you multiply that by 1.2. And that will tell you how big this circumference is right here. The next step is to understand what size circumference you actually need for your heel diagonal. So I'm a person who has pretty average ankle and ball of foot, but I have a very high arch and high instep, and that causes this diagonal to be really a lot larger. So you take the measurement of that diagonal. In this case, it's 12 inches. But let's say this particular mannequin had high arches instead. And so let's say they actually had a 13-inch heel diagonal. Even though this would be 13 inches in circumference, the sock circumference they need right here should be smaller than that, because you need your sock to stretch to fit. You don't want it to be the same circumference as your foot actually is. You want it to be smaller and then stretch. So what we would actually like for this is for the sock to have about 20% negative ease across that diagonal. So we can multiply that by 0.8, and that will give us 20% negative ease. That means that we would need a sock that was 10.4 inches in circumference. So it's not big enough for us and our 8-inch sock. So we need to somehow add 0.8 of an inch to that circumference. So we do that by multiplying by our stitch gauge and then reducing that somewhat. So we need an extra 0.8 of an inch added to the heel circumference. We're going to multiply that by our stitch gauge. So let's say our stitch gauge is 8 stitches per inch. That would mean if we were just going to add it based on the stitch gauge, that would be 6.4 stitches. But we actually want to add fewer stitches than that. And the reason for that is when we add stitches in this direction, it's going to cause us to knit extra rounds, and then that is going to create that heel diagonal. So just because of the triangular shape that we get and the stitch and row gauge ratios and how that diagonal all works out, instead of adding 6.4 stitches to the provisional cast on, we only want to add about 3/4 of that. So we want to multiply our 6.4 stitches times 0.75, and that's going to give us 4.8 stitches. So we're only going to be adding stitches and multiples of 2, so we can round down. I tend to round down rather than rounding up. So even if this were something like 5.8 stitches, I probably wouldn't round it up to 6. I'd probably still go down to 4. In this case, I would need to add 4 stitches to the provisional cast on, 4 stitches more than what I would have had for the heel when I'm doing this provisional cast on. Again, I have a link to a Google Sheets document down in the video description that you can use and in order to calculate the number of stitches that you need. When you open the Google Sheets document, you're going to see 3 yellow squares and you need to enter your information in there. The swatch I'm going to demonstrate next has 64 stitches, so I'm going to keep that the way it is. But my stitch gauge is different. I'm getting 9 stitches per inch. That's 36 stitches over 4 inches, and that will be the same over 10 centimeters. So whether you are working in centimeters or in inches, fill in that the same way. Now you can choose whether you're going to work in inches or centimeters, and you're going to fill in this measured heel diagonal on your actual foot. So I'm going to put in what my actual heel diagonal is, which is 12.25 inches. So this is showing you that the sock diagonal that I actually need is 9.8 inches. But based on the circumference of the sock that I am knitting, I'm only going to get 8.53 inches. So I need an extra 1.25 inches about. So the spreadsheet's calculating how many stitches I need, and then it's rounding down to 8. And here in this blue box, it's telling me the number of stitches that I actually need to cast on, which is 40. So I have a 64 stitch sock. That means I have 32 stitches for each half. But I'm going to be provisionally casting on 40 in order to accommodate my high arch. I've put half of the stitches on waste yarn, and then I did a provisional cast on that has my additional stitches. So I put 32 stitches on waste yarn, but I provisionally cast on 40 stitches because I need an extra 8 stitches. I'm going to work 1 full round just as I would for a regular basic plain heel like I demonstrated last week. Now I'm ready to begin my decreased rounds. We have more stitches on one half of the round than the other, so we are not going to do any decreases on the shorter half of the round. We're only going to be doing them on the longer half of the round. So now I am ready to work the half of the round that has more stitches. So in this half of the round, I'm going to work a decrease at the beginning and the end. I'm going to do them the same way that I was demonstrating last week. So knit 1, and then you do an SSK decrease. Knit until you have 3 stitches remaining in this half of the round. Okay, so I have 3 stitches remaining, so I will do a knit 2 together and then knit the final stitch. So now I'm going to work a plain round, and then I will work another decrease round. And I'm going to, again, only decrease on this half of the round. I will keep doing this. So we'll alternate a plain round with a decrease round until the 2 halves of the round have the same number of stitches. So now I can begin the process of decreasing on both halves of the round. And I'll continue doing that until I have about a third of the stitches that I have right now remaining. So I have 64 stitches now. I'm now going to decrease at each end of each half of the round until I have 20 stitches left. Okay, I have finished all of the decreases for the heel and I'm about ready to graft. So this is where the provisional cast on was. That's where I cast on extra stitches, and you can see here how the decrease line starts right after that provisional cast on this half of the heel, where on the other half it takes 8 rounds before it begins. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to graft the heel shut, and then I'm going to recapture the stitches from the provisional cast on and from the stitches that were sitting on waste yarn, and then we'll be ready to do the second half of this modification. I've recovered all of my stitches from the provisional cast yarn and the ones that were just resting on the waste yarn. And I worked one plain round while also picking up some stitches and picking up some loops at the corners and working them together with the stitches on the needles. So I'm going to be doing the same thing that I did when I first began this heel. I'm going to be decreasing every other round, but only on the heel half of the round, not on the instep half of the round. And so I'll decrease until I get down to the number of stitches I need for my foot. And again, I will do a knit 1 and then an SSK, knit across to the last 3 stitches, knit 2 together, knit 1. So I've done decreases on this half of the round. I do not do decreases on the next half of the round. So I have finished that first round. And now I'm going to work just a plain round, and I'm going to keep alternating a decrease round with a plain round until I am down to 32 stitches on this half of the round. So the result is that you get this kind of triangular gusset area on both sides of the sock, and that is what gives you the extra diagonal that you need and just the extra room you need in general if you have that higher arch area. The ability to provisionally cast on a different number of stitches for one half of the heel than you have for the other half allows a lot of flexibility when using the plain or Insta-thought heel. For example, after you have recaptured all the stitches from the provisional cast on and those held on waste yarn in order to knit the second half of the sock, you don't have to decrease until you're back down to your original stitch count. You can decrease more stitches or fewer depending on what you need for a good fit for that portion of the sock. If you have any comments or questions about today's video or suggestions for videos you'd like to see in the future, you can leave those down in the comments below or join the discussion in my Ravelry group, Rox Rocks. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.